Welcome, friends. Thank you for joining us in our studies of the Gospel of John, a book that's called the Gospel of Belief, and truly it is. As we look in this book, we find that among the things that Jesus used to convince people that he was the Christ was his miracles. We find that miracles were those things given by God to Jesus that they might prove that he was the Christ, the Son of the living God. Now, in the Gospel of John, there are 9 miracles. And as we look at these 9 miracles, they are divided as even as it could be between Galilee, where Jesus worked among the people there, and Judea. 5 of the miracles that are found in John, Jesus wrought in Galilee. 4 of them that Jesus wrought were those that were performed in Judea. As we look in this account, we find that the first time that Jesus worked a miracle that's recorded in Judea was when he was there for a feast. He went by a pool called Bethesda, and he saw a lame man there. He was one that had tried much to be healed in the waters, but as we look, he said that when I step down, someone steps in before me. And the thought was that the first one that stepped into the pool after the waters were troubled was healed of whatever infirmity it was. And Jesus walked by and saw him in his infirmity. And he said, "Would you be healed?" And he said, I try and I walk, but I don't have anyone to help me. And as I'm seeking to get down into the pool, someone steps in before me. So Jesus said, "Well, arise, take up your bed and walk." And he was healed. And this created no little conflict that day, because the disciples saw him carrying his bed, and it was the Sabbath day. And they said, "It's not lawful for you to carry your bed on the Sabbath day." And he said, "Well, the man that healed me told me to arise and take up my bed." "Who was he?" they said. And he said, "It was Jesus." Or he said, "I know not." Later, Jesus revealed himself to him and said, "You're whole. Be careful. Sin not, lest a worse crime or a worse event happen to you." So he went and told the Jews that it was Jesus that had healed him. They came to Jesus, and immediately they confronted him. "It's the Sabbath. You're doing wrong. You're working on the Sabbath." Jesus said, "My Father works, and I work." And he said, "I'm only doing the things that my Father gave me to do." And he said, "He's going to show me greater works than these, that you may marvel." And as we look in the events that unfolded, what Jesus said did occur. He did give his Son greater works to do, and these Jews did marvel. The second thing that Jesus did after the healing of this man at the pool in Judea was the healing of a man that was blind. Here was a man that had been blind from his birth, and it is recorded in John 9, his disciples questioned Jesus, "Did this man sin or his parents that he should be born blind?" Jesus said, "Neither, but that the glory of God might be manifested." So Jesus healed this man, and it caused no little conflict, because these Jews couldn't understand how that one that didn't keep the Sabbath as they viewed it could be one that was approved of God. And so when he was healed and given sight, the Jews asked him, "Who healed you?" And he said, "Jesus healed me." And they said, "This man's a sinner. You can't give glory to him. Give glory to God. This man's a sinner." And the blind man that now saw was one that said, "Well, I don't know whether he's a sinner or not, but I know one thing. I was blind, now I see." And after contacting his parents and learning from the parents that, yes, their son had been blind all his life, he'd been healed, but they were afraid. They wouldn't say who did it. They said, he's old enough, you ask him. And they did ask him again. He said, well, I've already told you. You want to learn again? Would you become his disciple? They said, well, you're his disciple, but we're disciples of Moses. We know God spoke to Moses, but as far as this man is concerned, we don't know whence he is. And the blind says, why, here is the marvel. You don't know where he's from, and yet he's opened mine eyes. They marveled, just as Jesus said they would, and yet they didn't believe. In the city of Bethany, a small village really, just a little ways from Jerusalem, there was a family that was very dear to Jesus. It was a brother and two sisters. The brother's name was Lazarus. The sisters were named Martha and Mary. And this association with Jesus is that actually incidences of it include this family in every one of the Gospels, but they're not all named. But the incidents that occurs in Jesus being given by Mary, the matter of having him be one that she poured precious ointment on him, and a conflict arose. Some of the disciples criticized her because what she'd done. And Jesus said, she's wrought a good work. But this was a dear family to him. When Jesus had performed the miracle of healing this blind man, the Jews were going to stone him because he spoke of God as his Father. It became necessary for him to leave Judea, and he retired beyond Jordan. He made converts there. But this family, Lazarus, Martha, and Mary, were Jesus' friends, and Lazarus became ill, very ill. They sent Jesus word and said, Teacher, he who you love is sick. And Jesus received the message, and he told his disciples, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be manifested in him. And 2 days later, Jesus talked to his disciples, and he said, our friend Lazarus is asleep. I'm going to awake him out of his sleep. And the disciples said, well, Lord, if he's asleep, he'll recover. Jesus said, Lazarus is dead, and I'm glad for your sake I wasn't there, but that you might see the glory of God as it is wrought in the miracle that we're going to do. We're going to awake him out of his sleep. Now, the disciples didn't want to go. They said, Master, just a few days ago the Jews were seeking to stone you. Would you go and be stoned again? Would you go and put yourself in that situation? Jesus said, we're going. And Thomas said, let's go with him that we may die with him. So to Bethany they went. When they arrived in Bethany, Jesus first met Martha. She was one that spoke to him and said, if you've been here, Master, Lord, my brother wouldn't have died. Jesus said, Martha, your brother will rise again. She said, I know in the resurrection of the last day he'll rise. Jesus said, I'm the resurrection and the life. Martha, do you believe that? She said, yes. And so Martha went and she got her sister, and she whispered to her sister and said, the Master is here. He's seeking for you. Mary rose up suddenly. Many Jews that were rulers and ones that not believers in Christ, but friends of Martha and Mary, had come and comforting them in the loss of their brother Lazarus. And when they saw Mary get up and leave suddenly, they supposed she was going to the tomb that she might weep there. And so they followed her. But she went to where Jesus was, and she said just exactly what her sister had said. If you'd been here, brother would not have died. And as she wept and as she wailed, Jesus wept. And the Jews said, behold, how he left him. Some said, could not this man that have opened the eyes of the blind cause that this man should not died? And then, as it was that this took place, Jesus said something startling. He said, Where have you laid him? And they said, come and see. And when they saw the tomb, Jesus, as we've said, wept. And then Jesus looked, and he said something that astonished them all. He said, Lazarus, come forth. Martha protested. She had said, take away the stone. And Martha said, Lord, he's been dead 4 days. But now the body decays. Jesus said, didn't I tell you, Martha, that if you believe, you see the power and the glory of God? She held her peace. And Jesus did say, take away the stone. And then, having said that, he said something else. He said, Lazarus, come forth. All of these individuals that were rulers and those that were unbelieving, that had come to comfort Martha and Mary, ones that were there. They saw his tears. They heard the protest of Martha when she objected to Jesus taking the stone away. They heard Jesus when he said, Lazarus, come forth. And then they saw something. They saw that dead man walk to the door of that tomb and come out of that tomb. He lived. He was bound in his grave clothes, and Jesus said, loose him, let him go. And it was for some of them an hour of change. They believed. But some of them didn't believe. And they went away immediately and told those that were the chief rulers and the Pharisees. Now you would suppose that these individuals that heard this story, when they said, what are we going to do? This man does many signs. You would suppose that they would say, this is what we need to do. His miracles tell us something. They tell us that he is God. He is the Son of God. For no man can do these things unless God is with him. But they did not say that. They said, what are we going to do? This man works many signs. But the high priest Caiaphas said, you don't know anything at all. It's expedient that one man should die and the nation perish not. If we let him alone, the Jews or the Romans are going to come and take our nation away. We must kill him. They didn't deny the miracle. They marveled at the miracle, just like Jesus said they would. But they were not willing to confess him. So they planned to kill him. A few days later, they gave a feast for Jesus in that city of Bethany. And Lazarus was a guest at that feast. And many of the Jews went to see, because they wanted to see Jesus, but they wanted to see something else. They'd heard about Lazarus being raised from the dead, and they wanted to see if he really was alive, and they did. And many Jews believed on him. But these hardened rulers and Pharisees said, we're going to have to put Lazarus to death because many individuals are believing in him because he's been raised from the dead. Oh, yes. Jesus had said that the Father will give me greater signs than these, the healing of the man at the pool of Bethesda, that you may see and marvel. And marvel they did. They had no cloak for their unbelief. But did they change? No, they did not. They brought about the matter of the betrayal of Jesus by Judas. They connived together and made false witnesses and false charges against Jesus and demanded of Pilate that he put Jesus to death. Pilate didn't want to do that. He knew that there was no crime, and he said so. But they said, crucify him. This man makes himself a king. And anyone that makes himself a king is not a friend of Caesar's. Pilate then yielded. Yes, they'd see many signs. They marveled, but they were unwilling to confess that Jesus was the Son of God. My friends, sometimes when we are reaching conclusions about Jesus, we may be called upon to make decisions that separate us from loved ones, from people that we have associated with. And what, when that hour comes, will we do? Will we hold on to our faith? Will we unashamedly confess, I believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God? If we're going to be saved, that is what we must do. But not all people are going to be that way, because just like there are those today that might make that same decision not to confess Jesus, there were those in the first century that saw these signs that Jesus wrought. In John 12, the record says, nevertheless, of the chief rulers, many believed on him. Because of the Pharisees, they would not confess it, lest they should be put out of the synagogue. For they loved the glory that is of man more than the glory that is of God. God gave them signs. He was going to give them the final sign that was more marvelous than the things before. They were going to crucify his son, but Jesus would do exactly what he said when in Jerusalem at the beginning of his ministry, he said, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Lazarus has fallen asleep. He was dead. And Jesus said, I go to awake him out of his sleep. And he did. That was temporary. How many years after that Lazarus lived? We know not, but he did die, because it's appointed him he wants to die. But one day, every grave is going to open, and the dead are going to come forth, and they're going to stand before God and be judged. I'm going to be in that number, so will you. Will God acknowledge us then? Will he acknowledge you? Will he acknowledge me? If you and I confess him to be the Son of God, and then all our lives live as his disciple, he will own us at that time to be his child. And we'll say, come, ye blessed of my Father. May that be the message you hear. May it be the message I hear. Thank you for listening. May God bless you. Continue studying this precious book, the gospel of truth, the gospel of faith.